yet another important topic in UiPath. I'll start with a quick introduction of myself. My name is RPA Solution Architect with 15 years of IT experience. I've worked with multiple clients in various RPA technologies, with Blue Prism, Pega Robotics, as well as UiPath. Currently, I'm based in Adelaide and working with the company Pernix, which is based in this city. I'm the speaker for today. Along with me, I have Param, who will be the Param. If you can introduce yourself, and then we can start with the intro.
Sure, thank you, Subhajit. Yeah, so hello everyone. Myself Parambir, and I'm a support service engineer here in Adelaide, working with Pernix. And from last 1 year, I've been working closely with UiPath from both infrastructure side and developing automation solutions with them. So it's been a good journey, good learning, and a great experience delivering projects in UiPath environment. So yeah, we'll go through the building the backbone of the whole UiPath automation environment, and we'll walk you through to the this new session. And thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks,
All right,
Param.
over to you, Subhajit.
Thanks, Param. So in today's focus on the infrastructure components of UiPath, we'll explore the different infrastructure hosting options available in UiPath and choosing them. Choosing one option. We'll also cover the basics of setup and configuration along with some of the best practices and recommendations. So in the next 60 minutes, we will go ahead with pretty much the what, why, and how approach. It will start with uh, the what bit. Like what are the core components of UiPath? What are the different infrastructure approaches? Then we'll move to the why bit. Why would an organization choose an infrastructure approach over another? And finally, how? Once an organization has decided that this is the one to go ahead with, how do we set up the essential infrastructure and also some key security considerations and best practices that needs to be kept in mind. So with that, we'll start with the UiPath core components. If we can move to the next slide. Thanks, Param. So talking about UiPath components, there are three core areas to focus on. The development environment, the bot environment where the bot runs and interact with other systems, and finally, the management environment, which we also call the UiPath orchestrator, which manages the bot. So let's look at them at a bit more details. We'll start with the development environment. The development environment typically includes the UiPath Studio, which is the IDE where the developers create UiPath workflows, sequence, logic, and publish them to the corresponding packages. Ideally, a studio should always be connected to the orchestrator. This connection is crucial for package deployment, developer license management, etc. However, there are other options for the studio to work in an offline mode as well. And we can connect the orchestrator only when it's necessary. So regardless of its offline studio mode, there has to be a mechanism wherein the studio can be connected to the orchestrator. Now let's look at the bot machines, where the bot uses the deployed packages to run an automation, interact with various sources, and performs the RPA actions. The bot needs to be connected to the orchestrator at all times. So one of the important aspect that's common to both developer environment and the bot environment and the bot machines are the services that run within them. So there are two primary services. One is the robot services and one is the robot executor. So I'll explain them both. How they are relevant and why they are common to both these environments. So as I mentioned before, the studio or the bot needs to be connected to the orchestrator. There has to be a mechanism through which they can be connected to the orchestrator. So robot service this connection. So using action, so it communicates with the orchestrator via WebSockets and performs periodic checks every 30 seconds to retrieve the configurations and other details. And that's how the bots are always connected to the orchestrators and know they're active. The next service is the executor, so which actually runs the automation. So whenever a job runs, so when we say in a particular machine, it launches of that robot executor process, which is a Windows process. So this is applicable whether the automation runs a bot machine, runs on a bot machine, or even when a developer is running the bot in a debug mode. So irrespective of whether it's a developer running it or a bot running the automation, this executor will be triggered and will be running at the backend. So if you look at this diagram, so on your left top, you will see that these are the services which are in that box named as Bot Studio. So I put them in the same box because, as I mentioned, these services are common to both the bot machines as well as the developer machines, which is the studio. We can move to the orchestrator now. So the bot is nothing but the
Hi, Subjit, you're cutting badly.
bot services.
Looks like there is some issue with Subjit connection. I think he'll join back in a while.
Okay.
Just give him 1 minute.
We'll just wait for him. And meanwhile, like if anybody has questions till this much, like studio bot machine information, they can ask, and yeah, we can answer those.
Am I
Hi, Subjit. I think there's some issue with your connection. Still, we can't hear you. It's cutting badly.
just let me give it one try.
Yeah, now I think we can hear you now.
Is it any better now?
Yeah, now
Yeah,
it's better.
that's better. Yeah.
Issues with the Bluetooth connectivity of the phone.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not sure. I mean, what motion did I cover or was I? So do I need to go through? Was I audible till UiPath bots and the services?
I think like I was able to hear you around robot services.
Robot services.
When you,
Yeah, I think you
So
were
maybe I'll
covering.
just cover the UiPath. I'll cover UiPath bot again, maybe sorry for the tech glitch. As I mentioned before, that the bot or the developer machine has got two services running at the background in common. The first one being the robot service, The robot service is a background Windows service that runs and facilitates this connection using a TLS, and it communicates with the orchestrator via WebSockets and performs a periodic check every 30 seconds. And that ensures that the bot is always connected to the orchestrator. The next service is the robot executor, which is again a background service, Windows service that runs the automation process. When a job starts, it actually launches an instance of that robot executor process. So whether that job is started from the to run a bot, or a developer triggers a debug mode start of the bot. Irrespective of the way it is triggered, the robot executor process runs at the background to perform the automation task. And if you are looking at the diagram on the left top, so that is where it's labeled as Bot Studio, because as I mentioned, these services are common to both the environments. Next, we move to the orchestrator. So orchestrator is the central engine for managing the automation and the bots. It has layers of REST APIs, webhooks, which allows the communication with the bot assistant. The bot assistant is again the services, the robot service that I mentioned before, which allows the connection of the bot to the orchestrator. And finally, it also offers a web interface on the client side. So users can use that web interface via browser to access the orchestrator and manage the tasks like scheduling, triggers, and others. Any other configurations can be managed. Finally, the SQL server, which is an important component of storing the UiPath entities. So any data that's configured, set up, sent in orchestrator, such as bot machine information, jobs, solution packages, schedules, triggers, assets, anything, queues, um, anything that has to do or managed within the orchestrator is actually stored in the database at the backend. And that's where the orchestrator communicates via the APIs and get those details. So this is the high level components and the most common components that we deal with on a day-to-day basis when you look at UiPath. Any questions so far on this? If not, we can move to the next slide.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. So with those components, UiPath provides different infrastructure approaches on where the orchestrator is hosted. Because as we discussed before, that orchestrator is the central component that manages all the other, the bots or the developer environment needs to be connected to the orchestrator. So how and where the orchestrator is hosted becomes pretty critical. And that's where we have the different infrastructure approaches. We'll start with the most common one, which is the default offering by UiPath. It's a SaaS offering, which is solution, and that cloud orchestrator and hosted access the orchestrator with the web interface in the browser. The pros around that are that the entire infrastructure of the orchestrator is by UiPath, so it reduces the overhead any infrastructure management. As the updates, and most importantly, there's no additional cost for the orchestrator, as it is included within the purchase of any standard bot license. So these are some of the pros. The cons are that there's limited control of the infrastructure and the data stored, because it is something that is managed by UiPath, and the data needs to flow. Some of the data, some of the infrastructure component is out of control of the client. However, if the client believes that the way UiPath has configured is good enough, they can very well go ahead with this infrastructure, which we'll cover in the next slide anyways. The next option is the on-premises option. So this option allows the orchestrator and the bots to be hosted within the organization's own server and machines. I'll just repeat, it's server and machines. It's not a cloud setup. So if the organization opts to install or set up the orchestrator within their own servers or virtual machines, that's an option that's open to them, and that we can do with an on-premise setup. The pros for that are that the data remains within the client network, and it does not involve any cloud services. There are few challenges with this setup. Some of the important features or advanced features, I would say, like the AI center, action centers, they are not available with this because it's not a full automation suite which comes. The next, there are higher cost associated with setting up this infrastructure, because firstly, we have to have those virtual machines or the servers available within the on-prem. Then we need to have some security considerations, assessment, and following which we do the infrastructure setup. So there are time and cost implications in doing that. Some of the additional features like Insights, Automation Hub requires additional efforts and installation. So that's a challenge as well. And finally, I mean, we mentioned that it's an on-prem setup, which is not the best enterprise level solution. So it will have some scalability issues. So the moment it goes beyond a certain limit, we will have challenges of scaling it to that limit. These are some of those challenges. We have another option, which is the hybrid option. This option offers the orchestrator to be set up within the cloud infrastructure managed by the organization. The difference from the first one, the SaaS offering had the cloud infrastructure managed by UiPath. Here, the cloud infrastructure is managed by the organizations. If the organization has their own cloud infrastructure set up like AWS, Azure, GCP, we can very well host the orchestrator in that. The pros, again, the data remains within the organization's cloud hosting network. It provides more control to that organization or the client over the infrastructure. As it is hosted in cloud, it's a more scalable enterprise solution premise. The challenges is the high setup cost, because firstly, it's the cloud infrastructure that needs to be hosted and managed by the client. On top of that, we have installations. That's time consuming. And again, if we are going for some of the advanced features like AI Center, the AI models, then we need high specification servers. In that case, the cost may go significantly higher, which is a major challenge with this approach. With this, we'll move to the next slide, where we'll see that if these options are available, how will the client or a customer choose that which option to go for? So we'll start with the SaaS model. So clients who are looking for a quick time to market, for them, that's the best option because it's more or less plug and play. So it's available to them. They just have to register, get the license, and get started. As simple as that. The clients who wants to reduce the infrastructure overhead. See, if they do not have an infrastructure team who wants to look into the on-prem or a cloud-based architecture, they can rely on this model. It's plug and play, easy to manage, and UiPath takes care of the overhead of managing that infrastructure. And finally, and most importantly, clients were okay with the security compliances. So client, they need to have that confidence, okay, whatever data is being stored, transferred, managed, and the security compliances around the SaaS services of UiPath, they are okay with it, they understand, and yeah, they have no concerns. The security assessment is done thoroughly. If those are the criterias, then the client is, it's best for the client to go for the SaaS model. We'll move to the on-prem. There are certain organizations who want to be in full control of the data storage and data transit. So that's where they do not want the data to go out of their systems or environment to the UiPath cloud. Also, that organization, if they do not have a cloud setup to host the full automation suite, as I mentioned, that the hybrid one requires a cloud setup within the organization. So if the organization does not have the cloud setup within their organization, then they are left with no other option but to go with on-prem. And finally, the client understands that if they go for on-prem, there will be certain features like AI Action Center, AI Center, Action Center, which will not be available. So they understand their use cases, and they also understand that if those features are not available, the trade-off is still okay. They can still go ahead with some of the use cases that they have that will not be impacted. So if that's the case, then it's good for the customer to go for on-prem. Now moving to hybrid. If the organization wants full control of the data, again, yep, that's pretty similar to on-prem. However, in this case, the organization has a cloud setup of their own. Like if they can have either AWS, Azure, GCP already set up within their organization. In this case, they can use the full automation suite as explained above in one of these clouds. And client, they need to understand that the initial hosting setup and the time effort, there is a decent amount of time and cost associated with the initial setup and the management. So once they're okay with that, that's good for them to go with hybrid. And most importantly, the client, they need to do that assessment that if they're using some advanced AI models, because as I mentioned before, we are using those models, the infrastructure cost goes significantly high, and that's where the client need to do some assessment. There are certain resource calculator available, which Parag will be covering in the upcoming slides. That gives them an idea that what is the cost that they are dealing with at the start if they are using specific models. So if the client understands that there is a certain trade-off, there are certain amount of time to be set up, however, they want a fully enterprise level solution and all the features, then they can go for hybrid. So that's pretty much how you choose the infrastructure model. I'll hand over to Param from here to describe how we can set up these different infrastructure at a very high level, and also as a prerequisite, some best practices, security considerations that follows. Over to you, Param.
Thank you, Subhajit. All right, so from here on, we'll actually dive into the house of the UiPath environment. So we'll start with the core component of the automation environment, the UiPath orchestrator. So as Subhajit has already explained about the different environment approaches, so we'll go through all the environments and how we are going to configure the orchestrator for them. So if you are choosing the UiPath cloud SaaS offering, like if the client wants that, then it's very straightforward. You just need to go to the UiPath cloud website and you can register there. and within within some clicks, within minutes, you will be able to start using the power of Orchestrator. And for that, just remember that you need to apply the procured licenses from the UiPath to assign it to the orchestrator. So we'll talk about that in the stages later. And going next to the on-premise. So for this, make sure that you have an on-premise virtual machine or server available with the specifications recommended by UiPath. So they are roughly around like 8 GB of RAM, 4 vCores, and decent amount of storage available for the virtual machine to host the server. And you can go through the UiPath documentation for the other hardware and software prerequisites which is required to host the server. And again, you can get the installer from UiPath, the Orchestrator MSI installer, download it on the virtual machine, install it using the Windows installer, and follow the UiPath documentation for step-by-step guide. And you can also host it in a Linux environment, a Linux server. So that is also available. Again, for that, you can go to the UiPath documentation, and you'll be able to configure it in a very little time. And moving forward to the hybrid environment, for this, the prerequisite is that the organization should have a cloud environment setup. Landing zone should be available on which you're going to deploy the hybrid environment. For this, you can also use the UiPath sizing calculator to determine the infrastructure specifications and the associated costs. Once you get the approval from the client, you can thereon utilize the UiPath cloud automation that are there available for Azure and GCP. So as it is a very complex configuration, a complex provisioning of the infrastructure, because there will be different resources that is required to host the whole environment. So UiPath suggests to use those automated templates, but the manual installation guide is also available. So you can follow that guide in the UiPath documentation to deploy it. And later on, for the high availability option, that is also available, but it comes up with an additional license from UiPath, the high availability add-on, that you can configure in the later stages if required. But initially, you can go with the basic configurations. And coming to the SQL Server database, so as mentioned before, that it is one of the required components. So SQL Server database can be configured along with the template, or you can manually configure the SQL Server for your environment in the cloud. And there's a note that you make sure that the Linux machines are the prerequisites for this setup, and those Linux machines requires high specifications. So just refer to the sizing calculator to just understand and go through the requirements. And once you are done with all these setups, like in any of the environment, so there are general configurations for all the setups, so that once you are done, you can ensure the URL is accessible from the web browser. Either you can access it from the developer machine or from the bot machine. And from there on, you can create your tenants for your dev, prod, and testing environments. Provision your licenses, add your licenses to the orchestrator, and assign it to the automation developers and automation users. You can create user groups and user roles in the orchestrator for developers, robot users. And later on, you can configure the necessary settings for your virtual machines where the unattended and attended robots will be running. So with that, we are done with setting up our orchestrator. So if anybody has questions till now, they can ask. Okay, if no, we can go forward. So now that we have set up our the orchestrator component, now we will be discussing the setting up of the environment, the UiPath Studio. So for this, the system requirements are similar to the orchestrator hosting server, that you have a PC with the operating system of Windows 10 or above, with good specifications like 8 GB RAM and decent amount of CPU power and storage. Again, you can confirm the hardware and software prerequisites in the UiPath documentation. So like .NET Core and .NET SDKs, those are some of the main components that are required to develop and package, like make a package of your solution. And for the installation, again, download the Windows installer from the UiPath and install it on your PC. And while you are installing it, make sure that you look into the options that are available to install. So you can either install Studio as a user, or you can install it for all users. Those two are options are there. So if you are using your personal laptops, right, you can go for your all users. If you are using your company laptop with standard permissions, then you might go with user, like just the user only, but you can confirm it with your admins and install it for all users. And once installed, the next part comes up is connecting your studio to the orchestrator. As Subhajit discussed, like talked about this, like the environment is already connected, always connected to the orchestrator. So it's very easy to connect it, your studio. So open the studio, and as you open it, you will see the window. As in the right side, you can see the picture. So there you will be, like, you will need to provide the service URL, the orchestrator URL, and sign in with your user credentials that are created in the orchestrator. And so the similar setup is done for all the environments. Either you are using on-prem orchestrator, cloud orchestrator, or hybrid orchestrator. The sign-in and the connecting of the UiPath Studio to the orchestrator is the same. And please ensure that all the installables are preferably should be preferred to be of the same and latest versions. For example, if you're running a orchestrator with the version 2023.10, make sure that your UiPath Studio is also same, or it should be in the same range. And going next, we'll cover the UiPath bot machine setup. So again, it is recommended to use a Windows 10 or above operating system virtual machine. And the specs are also required the same as we did for the PC and for the orchestrator, like in the on-prem environment, with a good compute power and good storage available. So again, check the prerequisites of hardware and software in the UiPath documentation, and then follow the installation guide to configure those prerequisites. Once done, we can next go to the installation part, where again we'll download the installer package from UiPath on the virtual machine. And here comes the a complex part. So there are two types of robots. One is unattended bot and other one is attended bot. The unattended bot is a type of bot that is maintained and executed through the orchestrator. So orchestrator is the main manager of the unattended robots. And the other one is the attended robot, which is managed by the user. So the user can directly trigger these attended bots from the virtual machine uh, in the real time. So for installing the unattended robot, use the Windows installer and install it in a service mode robot. So these options will be available there. So make sure that you click on the service mode robot for the unattended robot installation. And for attended robot, you can use either the Studio installer or the robot installer, and make sure that you click on the user mode robot and install it in that way. And detailed installation guide is available at UiPath documentation. You can follow that for the step-by-step detailed installation steps. And again, there's an additional note here. So if you are like Automation Cloud community user, then use the community editions of the installers. So there are a difference between the license installations and community versions installations. And next, we go through the connection of the bot machines. So as Suvajit has explained, the services running behind the bot assistant, the bots, the service executor, and the bot services. So to connect that, in the unattended bot, open the bot assistant tool after the installation, right? And on other hand, go to the orchestrator, your orchestrator web URL, the website. Go there, go to the machine settings, create a machine in the orchestrator, and once you create it, it will give you the output with machine key, client ID, and secret. So go back to the bot assistant in the virtual machine, use those machine keys and client ID secrets to connect to the orchestrator. So you can follow the step-by-step guide in the UiPath documentation. So it's pretty straightforward. You'll be easily able to connect that. And you can see the picture provided in the right hand side. So in the orchestrator settings, there's a connection type client ID. You provide the URL, you add the client ID, client secret, and click on connect. For the unattended bot, the connection is pretty straightforward. You can just use the service URL, the orchestrator URL, and there's a sign in button, so you can authenticate using your orchestrator user password. And there's an optional connection procedure as well, so that if you want, you can also follow the unattended connection procedure for this in the attended mode. So you can connect your bots to the orchestrator. Any questions till now? Okay, so if no, we'll go forward to the next slide. And in this section, we will discuss about the security recommendations and the best practices. So the security recommendations, like these are some, but there can be more. Like there are more. You can go out, go through some articles available in the community. There are a number of them. So these are some of the major security recommendations. So you can follow. The number one is the credential management. So whenever we create a solution, right, we might be accessing websites, applications, right? So to authenticate those, you will be using user and password. So store all credentials in the assets, which are by default encrypted in the credential store. Also, there are third-party integrations are also available. For example, if you want to integrate your Azure key vaults to the credential store, you can do that and save your credentials in the key vaults and access those in the orchestrator, providing those credentials to the robots. The next one is the logs enablement. So it is recommended that the production log level should be info level, and for developers, we can use verbose level. So in production, we are keeping the log levels to the info level only, not using verbose or other levels, because production bot will be running continuously. It can be running for continuously for 10 hours or continuously for weeks or months, right? And in that process, it will be logging a big stack of logs that will increase the database storage, and that can affect the um, processing of the automations. And lower down the speed and all. So it is recommended only use verbose level while developing and debugging your solutions in the developer environment. Next is the bot connectivity. So ensure that the bot remains connected to the orchestrator at all times and communicates via HTTPS protocol. So in cloud, it is, if you are using a cloud SaaS offering, it is there by default. But if you are using a hybrid or on-prem environment, make sure that you configure a SSL certificate for the domains. So you can contact your admins to configure that for you. Next one is the license synchronization. So by default, UiPath orchestrator connects to the UiPath license server to synchronize licenses. So like if you have procured any developer license, robot licenses, right? So those are always like you always add them in the orchestrator, right? And they are retrieved through the server, through the UiPath license server at all times. However, licenses can be activated offline based on client requirements. So for the offline activation, you can go through the UiPath documentation to get more details on that. So next we will go through the best practices. So these are some of the recommended best practices that UiPath suggests and all developers go through. So the number one is the user groups and permissions in Orchestrator. So it is recommended that you always create user groups and assign roles to the and assign roles and permissions to them. For example, create a user group for developers, for robot users, for automation users, and assign a relevant set of roles to them. And later on, add the users to the relevant groups. For example, if it is a developer, add them to the developer group. If it is a robot user, add that user to the robot group that has the right permissions, right? And with this, when we come to the license assignment, so it should be assigned through user groups. So always assign the user group to a always assign a license to the user group, not directly to the users. And why? Because, for example, if you have 5 developers, but you have only 3 licenses to be assigned, right? So it's better to assign those 3 licenses to a group and add the users to the group relevant to the work. For example, right now only 3 users are working, right? You can add those priority 3 users, and if somebody is not available, remove the user, add new user, so it will be automatically assigned to the user profile that is added to the group. So that's one of the use cases. And next is the environment segregation. So once you configure the orchestrator, so it is recommended that you configure 2 orchestrators, one for production and one for non-production environment. And why so? Because for production environment, we are isolating the orchestrator just for the production operations and keeping solely for the robot to run those operations and utilize the server compute just for those processes. And on the other hand, non-production environment is dedicated to the developers and the testing. So in case if there is extra load on the environment, so there is no harm to the production environment, that is still running seamlessly. And on the production non-production environment, if something happens, we can easily mitigate that without affecting the required automations that are running in the background. And with this, there's also an option for the disaster management. So you can create additional orchestrators for your production environment for disaster management. So that option is available. You can go through the UiPath documentation for that. It's explained very well there. And so with this, UiPath allows splitting licenses between prod and non-production. So let's say you have the license and you want to go, like you want to actually configure these segregated orchestrators. So UiPath has done a great job in providing this service that you can split your license between production and non-production, dividing the licenses. Let's say you have unattended robot added to your production environment and developer licenses added to your non-production environment. So that service is available. And so further segregation is also available. So once you have the orchestrator, you can create multiple tenants in that for different purposes for dev, testing, and UAT by creating multiple tenants. So some of you might have questions like what is a tenant. So uh, let's say like if there's an organization, a company that has different departments, like there's a technical department, there's a finance department, so you can take those as the tenants. So there's a tenant for developers, there's a tenant for testers. So all the testing operations are done in the testing environment, in the testing tenant. All the developing operations are done in the development environment. So those type of segregations are available, and it is recommended to actually implement those segregations. And with this, we'll go next to the license management. So it is recommended that you always add the license to the tenant. So always add the license at the tenant level in the orchestrator. For example, if you have created a developer's tenant, add all the developer licenses to that tenant. And when you first time configure your orchestrator, by default it gives you a default tenant. So make sure that you create your custom tenants and assign those licenses to those custom tenants specifically. And to further drill down, folder segregation is available. For example, we are in the testing environment, testing tenant. You can organize your automation folders into different uh, for different purposes. Let's say there's technical testers, they have different requirements. So you can assign a set of testers to access those folders, which contains the automations, jobs, um, automation jobs and triggers, all those configuration. And on the other hand, there's a functional team who wants to test it from the functional side. So you can assign those users to that folder. So this folder segregation helps you to maintain a better identity access management for the operations. So these are some of the best practices that we have been performing, implementing in our solutions. And yeah, you can look for more articles around there that also talks about some more best practices available there. And with this, I will hand over it to the audience for any questions.
Feel free to ask any questions. I mean, we believe that this session was targeted for setting up the infrastructure. So I mean, if anyone is setting up the infrastructure for the first time, I mean, and they need to make some decisions on what infrastructure is best suited for a specific client, and what are the main components that they need to look into when they're setting up the infrastructure. So this session is dedicated to those kind of questions. So I believe this will be helpful for someone who is doing this infrastructure setup and who has been working with a client for the first time, was setting up UiPath. Any questions? I mean, feel free to ask in this forum. I mean, you can also reach out to us, me or Param, anytime. Um,
I'll just stop sharing my screen, but we are here to answer any questions.
so if there are no further questions, maybe we can close the session for now. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me or Param for any questions. So our email IDs will be available in the community sessions. So yep, and this video will be available in the session in the community forum as well. So feel free to refer any questions, reach out to us. Thank you.